Hi, this is the Wedding Wednesday report brought to you by the Australian Academy of Wedding and Event Planning and Christine Kerr. This week we are talking about weddings in unusual spaces. Now this really is a topic for both the wedding planner and wedding designer. So let's dive into this one. There's a lot to consider when planning a wedding in an unusual space. So what do we classify as an unusual space for a wedding? Really, any space that doesn't come with four walls and a ceiling and a floor like a traditional ballroom is an unusual space. It might be a warehouse or a museum. Very often it's an outdoor space. At the moment we are seeing weddings in paddocks and at home are really popular. Weddings on beaches are still popular, maybe not quite as much as they were, but this is also an unusual space. As many of you will know, I recently got married and my own wedding was held in what would be classified as an unusual space. It was held in the garden on my property. I live on about 8 acres, so we were in a confined space, but it was very definitely an unusual space and one that came with challenges. I love weddings in unusual spaces, but there are advantages of having a wedding in, say, a ballroom. They do give you walls to work with and you have a lot of the facilities there. There are so many things to consider when you don't have that traditional space, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. The advantage of doing a wedding in an unusual space is that you really have the opportunity to create something unique for the couple that you're working with, and that's primarily why a couple would choose an unusual space, although sometimes it's out of convenience or because a place has significance to them personally. The first challenge of working within an unusual space is really considering how you're going to utilize it to ensure that the flow is still there. So we talked about a ballroom before. It contains the wedding, and that in that way everybody is in the one place and there's a flow to it. The minute you have a wedding in an unusual space, that can go out the window. If your space is too large, what you will find is that groups of people will spread out and you'll lose the whole dynamic of the wedding. It can really dull the wedding right down. So if you are planning and designing a wedding in an unusual space, you really need to consider how you're actually going to contain people in areas, and that's one of the reasons why lounging areas have actually become really popular at weddings, because often you will see them in spaces that are unusual. They help to create rooms within a wedding and direct the flow of people around, and that's really important, not just for the look of the wedding but actually for the overall vibe of the wedding. Unusual spaces bring with them a lot of other challenges though, not just about how you're going to make sure everybody's having a good time within the space. And there are a number of things that you must consider very early on in the planning stage. And this really is where a wedding planner comes into their own. They need to assess the unusual space, work out what the challenges are, and then how they're going to address them. There really is nowhere that a wedding can't be held, but there will be a list of things that need to be overcome to make sure that it works. So we're talking about things like lighting, facilities like toilets, for both guests and staff who are going to be working at the wedding. You also have to consider loading in and loading out. If you're doing a wedding in the middle of a park, are you going to have the access that you need to bring equipment in that you need to set up things like lighting? So these are all things that you must consider, and we've put a list of some of them up here for you. But really my primary advice to anyone who is designing and planning a wedding in an unusual space is to go and spend time in that space with the knowledge of what the couple wants for their wedding, and then work through your challenges, and then on the other side write down how you're going to deal with those challenges, and that will become a really significant part of your planning for the wedding. I love a wedding in an unusual space. So today's report is certainly not about scaring you off wanting to work in one. I think that whenever a couple comes to you and says, I want to do this thing, but it might be a bit out there, that's when you should get excited, because that's where you can really come into your own as both a planner and a designer and use your creativity and knowledge to make something work really well that could otherwise not work at all. Thanks for joining us on this week's Wedding Wednesday report. We are going to continue with the unusual spaces story next week, so please do join me. And whilst you're here, subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss an episode of the Wedding Wednesday report. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now. You're meant to laugh.
Sorry. I was like, Wendy's like, she
If you're a baby, you'd be in bits on the floor by now. What's wrong with you, woman?
Oh.